And if you look, you can see where the hitboxes are getting made in that circle around our player. Hey guys, Kraig here, and welcome to another GameMaker Studio 2 tutorial. This one is part of the combat series, and we're going to be talking about melee attacks today. So in the last one, we set up health on our player and on our enemy object that we created here. We wrapped up our health related functions in a couple scripts. Definitely check that out if you guys want to, but if you're familiar, you know, all I really did was start an enemy object and do the health stuff. So, you know, if you know how to do health, go for it, have at it. This one, we are going to be doing melee attacks using hitboxes. So let's just jump right into it. First thing we're gonna do is create a sprite, SPR hitbox. And the most important thing about this hitbox is this collision mask here. So, you know, regardless of what your hitbox looks like, if you want to tweak the collision mask, you can totally do that. I think a simple one is to just leave it as a square. So, you know, I like to take a bright color, so it's easy to see, to debug. Take a bright color, and then if you look at the collision mask, it's just the whole thing. I think that's fine for most situations. You guys will, you know, for your own games, maybe fine tweak it. Let's say you have a mace and you want a circle, you could use a circle, but yeah, most of the time a rectangle is fine. The other important thing about this hitbox is we want its origin to be the middle center. This is not a requirement, but it does make it easier for us to figure out where to place this hitbox in relation to the player when we're attacking. So we've got a hitbox sprite. Let's go ahead and make a hitbox object. And we're gonna do two things with this hitbox object. The first is set this variable that I like to call creator. And now you can call it whatever you'd like. The default value I put is no one because what that variable is intended to hold is an instance ID. Specifically, the instance ID of the thing that created the hitbox. Because we don't know, at this point I just set it to no one. That's going to be set when you create an instance of that object. It's useful when you collide with something. You can check who made this hitbox and decide, do I actually want to take damage? So let's say you're an enemy, you get collided with a hitbox. If it's the player that created it, which we can check through creator, we want to take damage. If it was an enemy that created it, maybe we don't want to take damage. So that's what that's useful for. The other thing we want to do with our hitbox is, you know, normally we hit something, we want it to destroy the hitbox, poof, it's gone, it's not in the game anymore. What if we miss, right? We don't want our hitbox to just sit around for the rest of the game ready for something to collide into it. We want it to destroy itself. So we're gonna use an alarm for that. We'll just set alarm 0 here to 2. Now you're probably wondering, okay, 2, what's that? Well, that's gonna be 2 game frames. The reason we put it to 2 and not 1 is because if we put it at 1, there's a chance our hitbox will be destroyed. Like, this alarm will expire, it'll run the code, and the code is to destroy the hitbox. The hitbox might be destroyed before something collides with it in that frame, which gives you really weird results, and we're gonna avoid all that by just letting it go for 2. So in that alarm code, alarm 0 here, we're going to destroy self, and we can do that by just calling instance destroy with no arguments, like that. So if 2 game frames go by, nothing collided with it, see you later. The next thing we want to do is come into our player, and we actually want to be able to create these hitboxes. I'm going to do this in the begin step event. You guys can do it in any of the step events, whether it's begin, whether it's step, whether it's end step. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is you're doing it in one of these. So I'm just going to call this actions because, you know, could be many types of actions you take. Attacking is just one of them. And for a control scheme, I'm thinking anytime you click the left mouse button, you're going to attack, it's going to make a hitbox, and it's going to make it somewhere between your player and where your mouse is. So depending on the angle of your mouse is where, you know, where the hitbox is going to be created in relation to your player. Some games, think of like classic Legend of Zelda, you could only attack in the direction you're facing, but I think for many cases it's nicer to do this sort of mouse control. So you guys are free to do it the other way if you'd like to. You can use the same principles here of figuring out the X and the Y. You would just use fixed directions rather than computing a direction based on the mouse location. So let's just do this here. First thing we're going to do is check whether the mouse button was pressed. We want it to be pressed and not just mouse button, because if it's mouse button, it's going to do this for every frame your mouse was held down, and that's probably not what you want. So mouse check button pressed, and we're going to do mouse button left. If you click your mouse button, we want to make a hitbox. Here's the difficult thing. Where do we make the hitbox? Well, we know it's somewhere in this circle around our player. We know it's going to be like based on where the mouse is, so it's probably a direction we're going to compute, and then we have to kind of figure out that X and Y. It's easiest if we figure out the X and Y in relation to our player's center, and that's because you imagine it's like the center of the circle, and we're creating the hitbox somewhere on the circumference of the circle. So if the center is at the player's origin, which is the top left, your player's here, and you're making it's just weird. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out our player's center coordinates. And that's pretty easy. Because we know the origin is the top left, it's 0, 0, so we're just going to take X plus the sprite width over 2, that's our center X. And we're going to take the sprite height over 2 and tack that onto our Y. And there you go. There's our center X and center Y. The next thing we're going to do is compute that direction. So point direction between our player center and the mouse location. So X1, Y1 are going to be player center X, player center, there we go, Y, and then mouse X, mouse Y, like so. And that's going to give us that angle. So, you know, if our player's in the middle and our mouse is over here at 0, up here's 90, over here's 180, down here's 270. And once we have those things, we can go ahead and figure out what the hitbox X and Y should be. So our hitbox X is going to be equal to this handy dandy function called length_x. Now, we talked about length_x, length_y back in the movement tutorial. It's very handy. It does some trigonometry under the hood to give you an X and a Y that are some length away from your origin, given a certain angle. Okay, so that's kind of a mouthful. Let's say, you know, you're at 0, 0, and you want to know the XY of something that's 1 unit away in the direction 90. So up here, your X would be 0, your Y would be 1. You know, and that's what these functions are figuring out. What if it's 45 degrees away? Well, now your X and your Y are, what is it, square root, something, the hypotenuse, you know what I'm talking about. Rather than having to do all of that math and trig ourselves, we're just going to use length_x, length_y. So specifically, the length is going to be, well, in this case, 32. That's a measure that we come to based on our sprites. So our sprites are 32 by 32. And if we're going from center to center, so player center to hitbox center, then 32 seems like a good amount. And I'll demonstrate that for you guys so you see what I'm talking about. So let's actually make a variable len, call it 32, just so we, you know, it's easy to configure. We'll say len there, and then that direction is, whoops, didn't even realize I did this up here, var point direction. That's not what we want. We want var dir, our dir variable is going to be set to the point direction. We're going to plug that in like so. And to that, we're going to add our player center X because our hitbox is being created relative to where our player currently is. So our player center plus this offset we just computed. And we'll do the same thing for the Y. So our hitbox Y is length dir Y, len and dir, plus, not underscore, plus the player center Y. And just keep in mind, it's the same arguments to these two different functions, but they are different functions. It's length dir X, length dir Y. Yeah, common source of bugs is forgetting to swap out the X and the Y. Same with these variables. But anyways, now that we know where we're going to create the hitbox, let's actually create it. And we're going to hold on to a reference to it in that hitbox variable. So if our hitbox equals instance create depth, And we're going to create it at hitbox X, hitbox Y. Depth is the same depth as our player object, and it's going to be an instance of obj hitbox. And the reason we held on to that hitbox reference is so we can then set our creator variable to be our ID. So there you go. That is going to make us a hitbox. If you want to, you can pause the screen there and get that code down. One thing I'm going to do just to demonstrate, as we come into our hitbox, I'm going to set this alarm to 100. That's not for the final game, that's just so you guys can see the hitbox get created. And if you look, you can see where the hitboxes are getting made in that circle around our player. So, pretty cool. We leave that, we come back, we'll set our alarm back to 2, the way it's supposed to be. The last thing we need to do is add a collision event to our enemies. So when they collide with the OBJ hitbox, they take damage. If the hitbox is from the player. The way we check that is we just look at that creator variable. So if other, that's a reference to the thing we're colliding with, other dot creator is equal to the player's ID, then we want to take damage. One note about this is normally referencing a variable from an object ID is not a great idea. The only reason it's going to work every time in this case is because we only have one player, one instance of the player in the game. So just keep that in mind. I would look that up if you're not sure what I'm talking about. Just object index versus instance index. It's a useful topic to understand. So we're going to take some damage if the hitbox was from the player. That's pretty simple. We're going to say current HP. I'll just do minus minus, so it drops 1. You guys can configure that however you'd like. Maybe they take more damage if it's from a certain type of weapon. And good question, I'm glad you asked. What if I have other amounts of damage? Well, you could set that in your hitbox as well. So like, damage equals, let's actually just do this. Maybe damage equals 1 by default. When you create your hitbox, you could set that variable too. So hitbox.damage equals, maybe you want it to be 10, maybe you want to set it to 5, maybe just leave it at 1. You could do that right when you create the hitbox, the same way that we did the creator variable. And then when you collide with the enemy, you could actually say current HP minus equals other dot damage. And now you can configure how much damage is being dealt. So like if you switch weapons, you could do more, you could do less, whatever. Yeah, so it's pretty easy to do actually, and a lot of things can be done that way through the hitbox. So the last thing we're going to do here is check if current HP is less than or equal to 0. We want to destroy our enemy, so instance destroy, because they're dead. Another thing you could do, the hitbox is going to destroy itself. If you want to destroy the hitbox after it's collided with an enemy, you can do that right here and just give it that other as an argument. It'll destroy the hitbox. That would be useful. Like, let's say you want your attack to only damage one enemy at a time. You don't want it to hit multiple. Like, let's say there's multiple clustered right there, and you would want to destroy that hitbox. If you wanted the other effect, though, if you wanted it to be able to hit multiple, well, then you wouldn't destroy it right there. You just let it destroy itself. But for now, just to kind of keep it simple, yeah, if you hit an enemy, destroy the hitbox. So you guaranteeing you do damage once. All right, let's demo this and call it a day. So here we are. Here's our hitbox. If we come to an enemy, wha-bam, wha-bam, get defeated enemies. And there you go. That is the health interacting with the hitboxes, creating our hitboxes around our player based on where our mouse is. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and we can address that stuff in the comments below, or I can make future videos to talk about whatever you guys would like to hear. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.